Swayam Prabha. Digital India. Educated India.
Good morning and welcome back to my course Partition of India in Print Media and Cinema. So, at the outset we need to understand what to expect for this module. We are going to talk about the imagination of woman and its in the importance that was given to the figure of the mother in colonial India. It was a pan-Indian discourse of motherhood, and it actually laid the foundation, and it extended a lot of motivation. It played a substantive role in the shaping of the Swadeshi movement, of the anti-colonial struggles. So, the nation was viewed as the mother, or the mother India was had taken after the image of the quintessential Indian mother, and womanhood actually was understood to find its it realized its importance in motherhood. It fructified, and it realized its importance, its role in the society as the mother. So, today we are going to talk about womanhood and motherhood. Now, historiography of partition, we have already talked about how history, the formal historiography and memory are not really convergent. They have different ways of looking at the past. So, when we look at the lacunae, the loopholes in the formal historiography, we understand that there is the need for a claim of personal identities of marginalized subjects to be included within the high political discourses. So, historiography of partition demands claims for personal identities as a way of filling up the loopholes within the formal discourse, and so the marginalized subjects such as the woman need to be incorporated urgently. Her voice need to be incorporated within the high political discourses. So, for example, women that lost their families, the male kin, had to acquire economic worth, and they could not remain confined to the traditional norms of behavior that was prescribed for the widows. So, we see that single mothers, unmarried women and widows actually come out of the precincts of their homes. Partition becomes a life changing affair for them. They have to earn, they have to become the breadwinners, sometimes the sole breadwinners for their families. So, partition has different kinds of meanings for these women. For some, it is an excruciating experience. It is a painful experience of losing of one's family and status and honor, and yet for others it is also a new opportunity. Some women actually testify to the fact that the partition had opened new grounds for them to become educated, become visible in the job arena, and hence become agents and of their own lives. So, partition had opened new grounds in terms of new opportunities for them, and they were suddenly in charge of their own lives. We have scholars like Urvashi Bhuttalia, Kamala Sen, Ritu Menon, Veena Das that contend that rape, abduction, forced conversion and sometimes repatriation or rehabilitation were key parts of, or in fact they are key parts of the partition memory that have not been adequately engaged with, that have not been given the importance that they deserve, and these narratives need to be folded into the meta narratives of decolonization and transfer of power. So, oral history plays a quintessential role in serving as a device, a tool for recovering the past, right. So, talking to the survivors, asking them about their experiences. So, these complement the formal process of historiography. So, talking about womanhood and motherhood, we understand that since the colonial era, we never had a unified idea or notion of womanhood in India. There never was. Different agenda, different caste positions, different social and ideological roles actually led to gradations among women. So, the impact of partition riots on pan-Indian womanhood actually ascribed compartments to this category of women, and defined the women in terms of their caste, class, community based groupings. So, we see that womanhood is not at all a converged meaning, but rather a range of meanings, a kind of spectrum, on one extreme side of which is the symbol of the Bharat Mata that is inspired after the image of the upper caste elite Hindu woman, and on the other extreme is the Dalit female, who is often demonized. The women's position vis-a-vis the partition discourse has a double-edged meaning of victimization and finding a position in the society, finding their own voice, their own foothold, and forwarding their own rights. So, both were happening hand in hand. Urban women's groups actually were participating in a parallel feminist Swaraj or self-rule during India's independence, and through this they were emphasizing the foremost need of women's education in order to facilitate their own sense of self-sufficiency, so that women could sustain themselves. It was thought as very important at that point. So, conversely, we also saw that at that time women would very frequently relapse to conventional feminine roles. They stressed the importance of traditional tasks as the mother, the sister, the dutiful daughter, and the wife, and so forth. So, even the feminist factions were understanding the figure of the woman in terms of her inspirational role in the society rather than her substantive position as an individual subject and a citizen. So, for example, we see the nationalist feminist factions endorsing education for women, but although education was being promoted, how was it being promoted? There was emphasis on women's exemplary motherhood and their role as wives, and so even as women were continuing education beyond high school, they were pursuing their graduation degrees, it would commonly lead them to disciplines such as home science, basically training the woman to become an accomplished homemaker or housewife. So, education did not necessarily feed the woman's purpose of self-development, rather it was actually playing an important role, enhancing the demands of the time, supporting the demands of the gentlemen, the gentry class. It was serving the needs of the demands of the refined Indian man, And so we see that education is hardly something we can call as self-referential. The woman's education is meant to fit into the larger schema of things. So, for example, we have the faction called All India Women's Conference AIWC that aimed at unifying the elite Indian Hindu and Muslim women through social welfareist networks. It could not rid itself of class, cultural, communal ghettos. So, AIWC members' participation in independence struggle followed MK Gandhi's footsteps, and some of the forerunners of AIWC such as Ashoka Gupta, Renuka Ray chose political particularism through their avowed affiliation with the Congress. So, in India we have to remember they have always identified with different economic backgrounds, different individual feminist positions. There never was a unified notion of feminist struggle, and so the demarcation between the homemaker and the service woman had never gone. These factions, these feminist factions had never functioned towards eradicating this gap. In fact, this gap further accentuated through the functioning of several feminist factions. In the political arena, the feminist factions were willing to be recognized as in terms of their roles as mothers, daughters and sisters rather than as individual female citizen subjects. So, the question of being an individual in isolation from or being decoupled from a fellow male was never present. And so, what was being promoted through important feminist factions, through important social welfare networks spearheaded by women, were essentialized female sexuality and virtues such as pacifism, self-sacrifice and motherhood. Women's interest and participation in the anti-colonial campaign with Mahatma Gandhi would date back to Swadeshi movement, where we see the middle class women emerging in the public forum for the first time. So, they were actually supporting Gandhi in boycotting British goods with the goal of fostering local industries and cotton crafts, and so the Manchester textiles were boycotted, they were burned. Instead, khadi was promoted, but we later understand that women were supporting MK Gandhi in a very abstract. What the Dalit discourse says is that this was a very abstract, a very high end and elite proposal that not all peasants, not all members from the fringes of different Indian societies could afford to participate in. So, the question of burning one's clothes that were cheaper than the indigenous counterparts would entail being a wealthy person. It would entail some degree of socio-economic support or a base. In the fitness of things, it was understood that burning clothes was not the best expression against the British Raj. That was what the peasants would think. So, for example, the OTRs were peasants, and Ramchandra Guha would study that they preferred the saffron clothing to the khadi. They said that the peasants would say that they had generationally fought against landlordism, against any kind of hegemony, British hegemony. They had their own symbols and it did not converge with the khadi. So, when coming back to the central argument, when women were participating in Gandhi's movement, they were essentially identifying themselves with a mode of protest that had its networking, its connections with the upper echelons of the Indian society. So, the Gandhian interpretation of the Indian housewife, moreover, perpetuated stereotypes of essentialist non-violent femininity. So, Gandhian female activists that followed the footsteps of Gandhi hardly challenged the prevalent picture of Hindu sisterhood or women's co-authorship in the making of patriarchal Hinduized nation. So, when we talk of co-authorship, many feminists such as Ketu Katrak would contend that co-authorship refers to women subscribing to the position of secondary citizenship, women consenting to their roles as secondary citizens, right. So, these factions echoed the Gandhian viewpoint of gender as one's destiny. So, socio-spatial demarcation of an individual's role were made according to one's gender. And so, we see critics such as Ketu Katrak talking about the traditional ideology, Gandhian traditional ideology that control the woman through ideals of marriage, wifehood, motherhood and their service to the domesticity. And Gandhi would ask men to be just towards women, to be fair towards women, while also legitimizing the male authority. So, Gandhi's understanding of the superlative qualities of women was deeply rooted in the Hindu patriarchy, and he was preoccupied with, and this actually went on to speak to and inform the image of the Bharat Mata. The Bharat Mata that is that has her blown up and celebrated glorious image in Bankim's song, Bankim's poem Vande Mataram. So, Gandhi was deeply influenced with and deeply inspired by the desexualized image of the woman, which interlaced religion, the concept of female body's purity and economics with nationalist sentiments, and it actually imposed a virtue discourse on the image of the woman. So, next we are going to talk about the Indian housing structure, and this is a pan-Indian thing. We talk about the Kacheri and the Andar Mahal. Once again, this coinage has its class caste dimension. A peasant that lives in a shanty, in a hut, cannot probably afford an Andar Mahal and a Kacheri. It refers to a sprawling mansion. Andar Mahal refers to one's inner house, whereas women would generally live, the female kin would live and they would stay within the precincts of this space covered by a parda or a curtain. So, we see screened compartments within the house of the elite Indians. The special arrangement of these households where a courtyard would separate the female habitat of Andar Mahal and the male dominated Kacheri tells us about the limited mobility of the well-bred woman, how her mobility was curbed and defined within a pre-given circle, and she could not move beyond that. So, the question of the good pure Hindu woman who was the embodiment of the moral order of her community and who empowered the spiritual entity of Bharatvarsha had always already been there. The peasants, the working class women, the artisans and the non-Hindus, they would never feature within this discourse of the Hindu household, the Hindu household that maintained modesty through parda and andarmahal. They were at the fringes of such a debate. So, regarding sartorial choices and regarding women's food habit, women's special belonging, there have been several important interventions, several important studies, one being by Himani Banerjee, who says that through notions of morality, virtue and vice as connected to the body and sexuality, and by conflating respectability and virtue with asexuality or non-sexuality, women themselves substantially inflicted the sign of Bhadra Mahila, the hegemonic moral, aesthetic, erotic configuration of the women of propertied classes in Bengal. Women themselves, through their own subscription to the same discourse of quote unquote shame and civilization, participate in the same conceptual enterprise. Their construct of femininity shares with men the premise of gentility or female goodness, but it is also self-divided and self-censoring. Women actually support or endorse certain patriarchal values in their self-imaging. Further, Ratnabali Chatterjee says that the Bhadra Mahila centric signifiers such as a specially separated Andarmahal and Parda would traditionally earn a specific group of women higher social and moral status by virtue of maintaining these, and compared to their poorer counterparts who had to appear in public for manual labor. We also ask the question of who could afford the Parda and the Andarmahal. So, the first reform movement for Indian women's position took place among the middle class in Calcutta in the 19th century. Some of the leaders, some of the forerunners that spearheaded these movements were Raja Ram Mohan Rai and Mahadev Govind Ranade. They were prominent figures during this period who were instrumental in bringing about changes, positive social changes vis-a-vis women's position in the society. So, the social reformers like Ram Mohan Rai and Govind Ranade condemned practices such as sati, parda and child marriage. The irony that the patriarchal structure of upper caste Hindu families is settled on the ideological edifice of the Bhadra Mahila's body, and the irony is that even as social reformers such as Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar and Raja Ram Mohan Rai are proposing, they are fighting for changes, they want to bring about these changes through following orthodox Hindu diktats. They cannot bring changes from without, they have to devise transformations within the Hindu society from within, right. So, Ishwar Chandra Vidyasagar grieves the birth of Indian females in a general misogynist environment. There are discussions of widows, the state of widows in different books such as Hindu Abalaganer Hinavastha by Kailash Bashini Devi, and then Trailokonath Mukhopadhyay's Domru Charit, and then we have other authors such as Jyotirmoyi Devi, we have Sarat Chandra Chattopadhyay and Ashapurna Devi discussing about the plight of the Hindu widow. So, sati was a practice of shastric injunction that was meant to preserve the deceased man, the dead Hindu man's widow's purity. So, in other words, if she did not die, she would resort to promiscuity and to promiscuous behavior, and her chastity would be threatened. So, the colonial India treated women's marital status within the purview of within the domain of personal laws, such that the British legislative machinery required arguments that were modeled on Shastras and on the Shariat in order to bring about any positive transformations. So, we see that Ram Mohan Rai is quoting from Manu Samhita. He is quoting Manu to implement stern observance of widowhood rather than immolating them. Similarly, Vidyasagar is citing Parashar Samhita Sloka to argue that widow could remarry in the Kali Yuga. So, they have to recourse to very orthodox arguments in order to eradicate these evil practices, social practices. That is the only way. To make his argument agreeable in favor of the widows, Vidyasagar was supporting certain orthodox Hindu convictions. So, he would say, for example, something that modern feminists would take offense in. He would say, for example, that widows' remarriage actually is a kind of cushioning against other degraded practices such as prostitution, adultery, incest and feticide. So, in other words, the only means of maintaining purity of social order was through remarrying the widows, and so remarrying the widows would ensure that their female sexuality has been channelized in a fitting manner, right. We see P.K. Datta making the similar argument. He is studying how the Hindu widow becomes a symbol that Hindu community is obsessed with the question of safeguarding the Hindu widow. So, according to the Arya Samaj, widows were the cause of the Hindu community's degeneration, degradation. So, he was the Arya Samaj was actually referring to the uncontrolled sexuality and the chances of widows falling in the hands of the non-Hindus. So, there was a fear of the widow's desire being translated by her becoming a victim of Muslim lust. So, widows were oftentimes seen as victims of Muslim lust, and the Muslims would conversely say that whenever there was a case of the widows running away, eloping from the family with a Muslim male, the Muslims would argue that the Hindu widows actually initiated these abductions. So, Spivak in this regard notes that the socioeconomic dimension that informs the practice of sati. So, abolition of sati according to Spivak suggests that a widow in the absence of her husband is liable to become the owner of her husband's property, and that would become a kind of obstacle for the husband's male kin, and that is how she looks at the practice of sati as a way of getting rid of the deceased man's wife and taking a control of his property. So, Spivak also says that in this debate between the noble Hindu and the bad Hindu, the discourse centering the question of sati and abolishing of sati that takes place happens at the expense of disappearance of A, the woman, and B, the British from the scene. So, the feminine sex subject is successfully effaced. Necessarily, it is a homosocial discourse. So, next we are going to talk about how Shivaji Bandyopadhyay reads Michael Madhusudhan Datta's literary work, Shushilar Upakhan, where this character of the Zamindar of Vijayanagar, his name is Babu Jayachandra Bandyopadhyay, and he is designing syllabus. He has 4 separate schools for for upper classes and upper castes for the subalterns, and then another for the women. Separation being his principle of operation, the more sophisticated courses are excluded because they are seen as burdensome, and so they are not included in the syllabi of the subalterns. And then to avoid the unhealthy mingling of castes, the zamindar sets up 2 schools. So, education system being segregated in terms of class, caste, gender. Having thus classified the children of Vijayanagar into 4 clear categories, Jayachandra surely has the rare satisfaction of efficiently maintaining the rigidity of a closed and compartmentalized society. Similarly, Shivaji Bandyopadhyay, so he says how Shushila goes on to become the Nobina, the perfect new woman that fits into the larger scheme of the modern imagining of a nation. Shushila's Bhadramahilahood is a cumulative product of the European and the Indian moral components and an outcome obtained after the purging of various negative socio-cultural filtrates. Thanks to the careful tutelage of the 2 teachers, one European and the other Bengali, fortified as they are by the strong recommendations of the European women of Calcutta, Shushila turns out to be an exemplary student, a perfect Nobina. So, similarly, Jashodhara Bakshi is studying how the society's obsession with the figure of the refined class woman has gone on to overlook the role of the girl. So, while the discourses mainly focus on the acculturated and the affected womanly virtues and skills, there is still a short-lived phase of girlhood which has possibilities of different ruptures. So, something that is not really controlled and coherent, and yet Bakshi would study that the feminine games and literature created for the girl child's consumption are very carefully, systematically shaped such that what the girl child reads, the suitable books that she gets to read, and the exemption of physical agility, these things are trained when a girl child grows up. All of these contribute towards replacement of her pre-feminine infancy with a consciously feminized gentlewomanhood. So, next we are going to very quickly look at Bharati Ray's arguments about the politics within the joint family. So, 20th century Bengal saw the struggle for power among middle class women, and its site, this site of struggle for power was the joint family, and this struggle actually happened between contending generations of women within the household. So, intra-female rivalry would actually inform the joint family structure, and so awareness of their rights, involvement into the public sphere, with all these factors coming in, the rivalry would be accentuated, leading in many times to fission and alteration. And she studies very interestingly the space of the kitchen, which becomes the site of contestation. The women actually struggle to establish their authority within the limited space that has been socially allotted to them. So, Bharati Ray says, she notes that prescribed norms of Indian family generally put the female children below the men. So, they have they would generally be denied of right to become educated, they would be married off before they reached puberty, and they would be victimized by the system of dowry. And so, women could not really establish themselves or be claimant of membership, a prominent membership within the natal family. Daughters were taught to be obedient, hardworking, passive. So, these were all part of becoming the refined woman. This is what women's education mainly entailed, becoming worthy wives and mothers that supported the project of the nation, whose enactors were the males. So, we see the mother's importance and dominance. Ray is making a case, she is studying the case of Bengal, but we could extend this situation to the rest of the India and say that the mother has a paramount importance, and her dominance in the joint family is deeply ingrained in the cultural concept of Bengal, but we could say of India at large. So, it derives from the matrilineal tradition and the image of the pre-Aryan mother, the goddess cult Shakti, which has been appropriated by the Aryan pantheon and invested with new socio-cultural logic. So, in the struggle for hegemony, the mother goddess manages to retain her primacy, and that primacy is mirrored within the joint family values. So, the motherly role is a peculiar case where the man as the son gets temporarily tamed, domesticated. His brash macho figure becomes it's converted into a submissive son in exchange for tender emotional dependence, right. However, we see that with high education, with education and career oriented learning coming into the picture in post Second World War female generation. So, for the post Second World War female generation, high value was placed for education and career oriented learning, and so women had began to contribute fiscally, financially to the in-laws household, and so they would no longer be ideologically or physically controlled within the orthodox structure. And so there were cases of certain positive relaxations from the senior woman, most of the times the mother-in-law's control. The concept of time and temporality had vastly changed for a new generation of working women. So, we see that women have been denied new possibilities due to several factors. One could be due to a lack of career prospects and the limits of a developing economy, and finally, many women still seek emotional attachment to their tradition. They identify with religious and traditional values. So, the female authority structure is based on the male authority. Feminist scholarship, we use the term female patriarch. So, women dominate women. A female's victimization by another female aggressor can be defined in terms of the values that patriarchy has imbibed in the older generations of women. In the older generations, so women are dominated by the males, by the female patriarchs, and then by the greater society and culture's economic and power domains. So, in an Indian milieu, we see that class, caste, gender, family, they are all integrally interconnected, and any radical change of familial power structure calls for a fundamental metamorphosis of the entire socio-economico political cultural network. So, with this I would like to conclude today's lecture. Thank you.